Good evening, everyone. We could take our seats. We are about to begin. My name is Dan Kavicki. It's my great pleasure to welcome you tonight to Rhode Island School of Design for tonight's address with Ambassador Andrew Young. This event is the culmination of RISD's 2016 celebration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy, a series of events that has included programs and workshops for children, students, and the greater community, all emphasizing the power of reflection, inspiration, skill, and service. I will be moderating the evening's proceedings, which will include remarks by Ambassador Young, followed by a Q&A session and a book signing. Some quick reminders. Kindly locate the exits nearest to you in case they become necessary. There, some back there, there's some over here. I've always wanted to do that, that's great. If you could also please silence your cell phones for the duration of the event so we can focus. I will try to give instructions later about how the Q&A will work and so on once we get there. Everybody ready? Phones off? Good? All right, let's go. Without further ado, please welcome RISD graduate, former head of furniture design, former provost, and now the 17th president of Rhode Island School of Design, Roseanne Summerson.
Thank you, Dean Kavicki, and welcome to everyone, to the RISD community, to our students and faculty and staff and alumni who are here, and as well as special members of our Board of Trustees, our Provost Sharma, and in particular, Ambassador Andrew Young. We're so delighted to have you here. In addition, we have many leaders in our community who have joined us tonight, and we're so happy to welcome you. I'm really appreciative of Ambassador Young traveling this way in the middle of what may be a big storm to see us, and so I guess the draw here was stronger than the weather, which is a wonderful moment for us. And I want to thank Dan Kavicki for agreeing to MC this event, and also call out the people that have worked so hard to make these Martin Luther King events possible. It's such a wonderful week, actually beyond a week, but it's such a wonderful series of events for our community. So I'd like to name the entire MLK Series Planning Committee. Tony Johnson, maybe you can stand, and I just point out, because Tony's so beautiful in red, that also Monique and Dimitri, maybe you can stand too, because Dimitri's the handsomest guy in the room. And also I'd like to recognize Andy Jock and Tracy Constantino, if you can all stand, and Ginny Dunleavy, and Greg Victory, and Emma Montague, and Josh Peacock. Thank you all so much for all the work you've done. So tonight's lecture is the central piece of our yearly Martin Luther King series. And these are a set of campus events, as Dean Kavicki mentioned, that really are intended to honor Dr. King's life and work and to bring them into our community and help our community to be responsive to the values of that work. And Dr. King's enduring vision of a more peaceful and just and equitable society, one that we still have so much work to do to achieve. We have approached this year's MLK series as an opportunity to think about what that work looks like from the unique perspective of RISD. What might we do at RISD as artists and designers and scholars and critical makers to contribute to this mission, to make social change? We've approached this question, as we are wont to do, with the hard questions here at RISD from several angles and perspectives. Back in October, we hosted the activist and writer Tim Wise, who spoke brilliantly and passionately with faculty groups and staff and student groups about the privilege of whiteness and inequity, and then gave a campus-wide talk on the means of uprooting unrecognized structures of bias and privilege. This week has been filled with wonderful events as well, beginning last Saturday night with a dinner and concert celebrating Dr. King and featuring the incredible Prism of Praise Community Choir. And on Monday, as we have for many years, a number of our students and staff volunteered at the Martin Luther King Elementary School, teaming up with the Mount Hope Learning Center for a day of service where we set up art projects for kids to do all day long. And for some of those kids, it's the most art they've done in their entire lives in one day. And as someone who is a mother and an artist of 2 young children, I know the importance of students having the ability to express themselves and make things in that free kind of environment. And it's a wonderful day that I look forward to every year. This year's Day of Service was especially special because we also partnered with a new organization, the Dorcas International Institute of Rhode Island, which is on Providence South Side and does terrific work and vital work with refugee resettlement and also with adult education. So that was a wonderful new partner for this year's events. And later on in the semester, as one of the final parts of this series, in April, we will welcome Faith Ringgold, who's an amazing artist, and you can get information online, and we'll also be letting you all know about that visit. So once again, I think we should all thank the Planning Committee for this incredible series of events. Now, Dean Kavicki, our Dean of Liberal Arts, will be introducing Ambassador Ambassador Young in a minute, but I do want to just offer a few moments of my own brief reflection. When I was a young girl, perhaps maybe a little younger than some of you who are students here, but maybe even at your age, to me there were 2 names that were synonymous with the civil rights movement and the potential for peace and equality in America, which we were so passionate about as young people and still are. One of those names was Dr. Martin Luther King, and the other was our speaker tonight, Ambassador Andrew Young. Like Dr. King, Andrew Young has walked this earth with remarkable courage and intellect, and with an almost miraculous strength of spirit and conviction. The images of King and Young that I saw on TV, some of which you've seen here tonight, side by side in solidarity, burn their way into my young imagination as powerful symbols of possibility, of what this world and this nation could become, indeed of the potential for leaders to lead positive social change. Ambassador Young once said that nothing worthwhile can happen in one generation. Now, this might seem ironic coming from a man whose generation of civil rights leadership has changed history and continues to change history. But for me, it is a powerful call to action for our generation of leaders. Our students and other young leaders, many of them people of color, many of them African American, have once again become the conscience of our nation, reminding us in sophisticated ways of the complex, intersecting forms of oppression that survived the civil rights movement and still thrive, unfortunately, today. It is up to us to work together to continue this struggle against oppression and to unseat it. Right now, RISD is undergoing a thorough self-examination to determine how we can be better as an institution and a community, and how we can make unique contributions as artists, designers, scholars, and educators to create a more just and equitable society. In a campus letter that I wrote to many of you in November, I issued this challenge to the entire RISD community, and today I reiterate it. How can artists and designers be agents of social change today? How can we be allies? How can we be leaders? What does an art and design practice that follows the path like that of Ambassador Young look like, not only opposing, but actively working to dismantle oppression? The hope of a secure and livable world, Dr. King once wrote, lies with disciplined nonconformists who are dedicated to justice, peace, and brotherhood. In any cause that concerns that progress of mankind, put your faith in the nonconformists. Well, we pride ourselves at RISD above all else precisely to being disciplined nonconformists. And just as our refusal to conform is what allows us to be innovators of art and design, Ambassador Young's refusal to conform has allowed him to be a lifelong innovator of social action and social transformation. Let us take advantage of this wonderful opportunity to listen closely to this fellow nonconformist's words. Ambassador Young, we thank you and welcome you to our community. And now, to introduce Ambassador Young, let me just tell you a little bit about our extraordinary Dean, Dan Kivicki. Dean Kivicki is a professor in history, philosophy, and social sciences, and the Dean of Liberal Arts. He has taught courses on music, on community, and politics. He's created a curriculum on blues and African American history for PBS. He served on the board of Music to Life, a nonprofit organization supporting arts for social justice, and curated several exhibits on the history of music and social change, including Songs of Conscience, Sounds of Freedom at the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles, and Culture Shock at the soon-to-open Grammy Museum, Mississippi. So I'm looking forward to this conversation between these extraordinary thinkers, so please join me in welcoming Dean Dan Kivicki. Thank you.
Thanks. It's a great honor to introduce Ambassador Young as this year's MLK Series Keynote speaker. Ambassador Young, more than anyone I have read, has taught me that the civil rights movement was about far more than I thought. One of the fascinating things about the movement, for example, is how it built on the techniques and strategies of diverse social movements that came before it. In Greenville or Birmingham or Selma or other actions, there were traces, connections to Indian nonviolent resistance to colonial rule in the 1930s, to the singing of the American labor movement in the 1900s, to faith-based social reform in the late 19th century, to the use of publicity in the abolition movement of the 1850s, to everyday acts of slave resistance in the antebellum era. The civil rights movement in turn became what Bernice Johnson Reagan has called the Borning struggle, a model for virtually every progressive social movement that followed it in the 20th century, including the anti-Vietnam War movement, the women's liberation movement, the gay liberation movement, the American Indian movement, the Chicano movement, the national liberation movements in Africa, and so on. Dr. King came to emphasize that the civil rights movement was not just about racism, but it was also fundamentally about poverty and war. The March on Washington in 1963 was officially named the March for Jobs and Freedom. In fact, the civil rights movement catalyzed a new American politics focused on the broader governing ideals of the nation: freedom, equality, justice for all, civil rights, and inalienable human rights. Andrew Young's career has embodied a similar kind of expansiveness. Ordained a minister in 1955, he became a primary advisor to Dr. King throughout the civil rights movement in the 1960s, serving as executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference from 1964 to 1970. His role and commitment to civil rights emerged, though, in a deeper context of global change. As he describes his fellow preachers in the SCLC, we were children of the New Deal of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We spent our adolescence enjoying the rise of the United States as a defender of liberty and democracy in World War II. Our high school and university life was defined and colored by the social responsibility of the Marshall Plan, a sense of world community signaled by the founding of the United Nations and the successful liberation of India from British colonialism without violence. Subsequent to the civil rights movement, Ambassador Young consciously built its goals and ideals outward, connecting social responsibility with national politics, urban development, global diplomacy, corporate consulting, and education. He served as a U.S. Congressman from Georgia's 5th District from 1973 to 1977, the first African American since Reconstruction to do so. He was the first African American U.S. ambassador to the United Nations between 1977 and 1979. He served as mayor of Atlanta from 1982 to 1990, during which he transformed the city with $70 billion of private investment. He was instrumental as co-leader of the organizing committee that brought the 1996 Summer Olympics to Atlanta. In 1996, he helped establish a consulting firm, Good Works, and then Good Works International, a foundation which continues to support development initiatives, particularly in Africa and the Caribbean. In 2003, he created the Andrew Young Foundation to support and promote education, health, leadership, and human rights around the globe. In addition, he created the Andrew Young Presents documentary series, which so far has produced 17 programs on African issues, the civil rights movement, and poverty, 7 of which have earned Emmy Awards. In short, Ambassador Young has continued realizing Dr. King's dream for global, racial, social, and economic justice in all he has done. As a preacher, a congressman, an ambassador, a mayor, as a coalition builder, a negotiator, an advocate, and a thinker, he has shown us one of the key lessons of the civil rights movement. Meaningful and lasting rights in a democracy are not simply granted by those in power, but they are defined and shaped, shared and sustained by all of us as fellow citizens and as human beings. In his book, An Easy Burden, Ambassador Young wrote, "I was raised on Luke chapter 12, verse 48, which says, 'From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required.'" Not all of us were raised on the book of Luke, but I hope that Ambassador Young's example can inspire us to consider that message. How can we, each of us, contribute to the work that still needs to be done to create a more just world? What privileges or opportunities have you been given? What is it that you are now empowered to do? In that spirit of reflection, let us give a warm welcome to Ambassador Andrew Young.
I'll come over there for questions. You can leave that there. It's okay. Thank you. This is a wonderful experience for me. And I won't try to define it yet for me, but I will try to share with you what hits me when I look at you. And I'm talking specifically about people that I've met since I've been here. I met a young man not long ago who grew up in New Orleans, and he's now the chairman and CEO of the entire Carnival Cruise Lines. And I said to him, "How could you grow up on London Avenue in New Orleans and end up leading the largest cruise corporation in the world?" And he said, "You know, at St. Augustine High School, they told us every day, be prepared, you might have to run the world." And he said they said that to us at lunch, and they said it as we left. And every time you run into one of the priests, they'd say, "Be prepared, you might have to run the world." Well, I like that, because what I have met, the people I have met here already, in one brief day, I guarantee you will run the world. And so be prepared. You got no choice. you are amongst the most blessed people on the face of the earth just by having the opportunity to come together in a place like this and spend a part of your maturation time interacting with each other. I don't know how I got to be what I am, but I know it started before I went to kindergarten. And all of you have had similar experiences which you haven't reflected on yet. But for me, it was an Irish grocery store on one corner, an Italian bar on another, and the Nazi party on the third corner. And so at 4 years old, I have to sit there because there was no air conditioning, all the windows were open, and every Saturday we'd have to see these people in brown shirts and swastikas, Heiling Hitler. So my daddy had to explain to me at 4 years old what white supremacy was. And he did it in a couple of ways that stuck. One, he said that he's a dentist. White supremacy is a sickness. And you don't get mad with sick people. You try to find a way to help them. And he said, furthermore, it's a contagious sickness. So if you get angry and get upset, you run the risk of catching the sickness. He said, don't get mad at sick people. You have to be smart. Don't get mad, get smart. And that was sort of the way I was raised from 4. He took me to the movies, and I hope you will go next week when the film on Jesse Owens comes out, because he took me to the Movie Tone News in a segregated theater to see Jesse Owens. And I can remember Jesse Owens winning the first race, which put a little lie to the whole idea of white supremacy, because he was not supposed to win it according to Hitler. And rather than give him the gold medal, Hitler and his party stormed out of the arena. My father was quick to point out, but now watch. Jesse didn't let that get him upset. He just went on and broke 3 more world records. And so when you have that kind of initiation into the problems of society before kindergarten, you don't have much choice. And all of you have had similar kinds of experiences. You probably just haven't had time to reflect on them yet. But you would not be here without the faith, without the vision, without the promise, without the prayers of a whole bunch of people. And every now and then I remember a specific person for doing a specific thing. The one I remember most is the 4th grade teacher who put her arms around me and said, "You sure form your letters well. You write just like the penmanship book." That's the only person who said anything nice to me in elementary school, because I wasn't always very nice. But I never forgot that. And so it is through life. The things that you hear about us in the civil rights movement were not something we sat down and thought up. It was sort of that we got swept up by a tide of history. And either you run and hide, or you stand up and you be counted. And with a leader like Martin Luther King, and also with my grandmama. My grandmama wanted to die. She lost her sight at 80. And from 80 to 88, when she died, I had to read the Bible in the newspaper to her every day. And every day she would pray for death. So the death was not something to fear. Death was just part of a natural transition in life through which everyone had to go. And so when Martin Luther King came along in my life at 29 or 30, and he said, look, to be free, 2 things have to happen in your life. One, you have to overcome the love of wealth. and you have to overcome the fear of death. If nobody can buy you off and nobody can scare you off, only then can you be free. And so he laughed and joked about death all the time, because he was the one who was most likely to be killed, but he never talked about his own death. He'd always put the blame on you. And he'd say, yeah, they're going to be trying to get me, but you know, you'll jump in the front trying to get your picture taken. And then he'd start preaching your funeral. But he'd preach your funeral and say everything you would never want anybody to hear in your life. But he would do this consistently. And what he was doing, in effect, was making us laugh at the possibility of death. Because for him, he knew it was inevitable. But he'd say, it's inevitable for all of us. And we were prepared not to make it to 40. But when you find yourself having made it now to 83 going on 84, you can't give up. You realize you were left for some purpose. And when President Obama said that we're the Moses generation, and I know enough about the Bible to know that Moses didn't really get cranked up until he was 80. So I don't know whether I can make it to 120. But I think all of us have to figure on staying strong enough, sane enough, and healthy enough to make it at least to 100. And you need to start thinking about that now. I didn't think about it, and that's why my knees are bad. But I thought about it, and my heart's good. Took care of my heart, never smoked, never drank, but I abused my knees, and it wasn't from praying. But that's a small price to pay. But the reason I say this is that we were anxious as I graduated from college, coming out of the Second World War. But what I wrote, I really didn't write until 1994. I was not aware of the fact that I had been so influenced by the events of the Second World War that my life was shaped without my knowing it. And all of the things that I was afraid of, all of the things that became problems, that there were problems in my life, and fears and anxiety in my growth and development, ended up being the very things that are responsible for my success. And it was, you know, there's an old spiritual, there's no hiding place down there. There was no place I could hide. I mean, I was there, I was in the middle of it. And the fact that I was born in that neighborhood, the fact that I was born to educated parents, the fact that I lucked up and married an educated woman who had been to one of the few schools in the country that had an active curriculum in New Testament nonviolence. Manchester College in Indiana, a little Church of the Brethren college, and she was from Marion, Alabama. And she and Coretta King had gone to the same high school. And Coretta went to Antioch, which was where the Women's Strike for Peace was founded. So she had a commitment to peace, as did Jean. When neither Martin and I we were still in the old neo-Orthodox Reinhold Niebuhr, the just war arguments, and yeah, I mean, all kinds of things that came out of World War II. And so it was highly unlikely, in one sense, that we would be in a nonviolent movement at the same time, the very year that I went to college, and the year before Martin graduated, India achieved its independence. And all of the college presidents of black colleges were invited to go to the Indian independence. Incidentally, they were invited by Harris Wofford, who was a Quaker, former senator from Pennsylvania, one of the founders of the Peace Corps, who was the beneficiary of significant inherited wealth. And he invested it in sending 12 college presidents of historically black colleges to India for 2 weeks to be a part of the Indian independence. Gandhi also came from South Africa to India, and the South African movement that Nelson Mandela was a part of was an outgrowth of the African National Committee. It was an outgrowth of the Indian National Committee of South Africa, and it's as though all of this seems to have been orchestrated by somebody that we were not aware of at the time. But looking back on it, we can see all of these things coming together to create an opportunity to change the world. I also remember the 2 little books that I was forced to read. I was 12 and I didn't have a job yet, and my daddy said, "You can't do nothing around here, you got to read 2 books." And I picked the smallest ones I could find. But they happened to be a book by Wendell Willkie, One World, when he was running against Franklin Roosevelt. Well, that concept was a foreign concept back then. The other one was a little book about Jesus, how one man changed the world. And it wasn't a particularly religious book, but it was a book about how ideas grow and expand and spread and impregnate other ideas in other places. And without knowing it, by the time I was 13 or 14, my destiny was already on the way. I wasn't the least bit interested in any of that, though. I say that to you to say that whatever you are about to do or going to do is already a seed growing in you. And by virtue of your being at this kind of institution and interacting with your fellow classmates and faculty, you don't have any choice. You must run the world. I was talking to 2 young ladies who are architects, one from China and one from Costa Rica. And it suddenly hit me that I was in Israel in 1966 when Dr. King was planning to take a trip to the Holy Land, thinking that if we could take enough tourists there, it might be a step toward peace between Israel and her neighbors. And it just intrigued me that the early Israeli government had an architectural design to integrate the society. They realized you just couldn't dump everybody into one melting pot, that you had to respect cultures and you had to respect traditions. So they laid out communities in pairs. And so you had 2 cultures living together side by side, and they went to the same they went to the same elementary school. They maintained their culture and their languages, and you had about 6 of these different pairs surrounding the center of the city. And in the center of the city, the shopping, the synagogue, the high school and the universities all began to mix. But they had a gradual, systematic plan of desegregation and cultural integration, which sort of fell apart when so many people came, and came from such horrible persecution, that their fears overwhelm their reason. But not picking on China, but China's got 104 different cultural nationalities. And we know now that if China's 8% growth rate drops to 6%, we feel it here. And we're right now, Wall Street is in real difficulty trying to find a way to figure out what's going to happen if China doesn't keep growing at 8%. Well, nobody else is growing at 8%, so there's no reason to figure China can grow at 8% continuously, but how are we going to make that up? Well, we're going to make that up probably because we're going to realize that the Caribbean and North America and Canada, who can no longer export oil and make it, we're going to have to become more of what we did with the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, is probably now going to have to become an economic reality because we need it. It was a good idea, but it was controversial. But now, if we don't have somebody growing, capitalism dries up. It depends on growth. The very thing that some of our leaders don't want to see is exactly what we need. The salvation of Europe is probably going to be the immigrants that come in. Just as we are reminded that Steve Jobs was the son of a Syrian immigrant. Thank God for that import. And everybody's got some of Steve Jobs in your pocket somewhere. But the impact of on a society, Tolstoy said no, it wasn't Tolstoy, it was Toynbee that said that the hope of the Americas is the presence of the slaves of Africa who might bring into Western civilization a new spiritual, cultural dynamic that will revive what was decadent and declining about Western Europe. So, I mean, it's all here, and we're all a part of it, and we're all scared right now. The political climate is such that, and it's the technical climate too, that everything wrong in the world happens to us somewhere every day. We don't ever get any good news. I was coming along in the beginning of the Second World War, and there were German ships that were being sunk off the coast of here in Long Island and the like. Franklin Roosevelt didn't say anything about it. He got on a cruiser and took a cruise down to Barbados and took a week to think about it. And when he came back, he had worked out a way to get America involved in the Second World War without declaring war, and he called it Lend-Lease. Well, President Obama and nobody else has the time to do that anymore. Before we'd know about it in the White House, it's been on Twitter somewhere or Facebook. We know all of the gory details. And that's what I say to young people who worry about, are things worse now than they were before? Hell no. I mean, there were 60 unsolved bombings in Birmingham, Alabama in 1962. 60. It didn't even get in the papers in Atlanta. Fred Shuttlesworth's church was bombed 3 times. And only on the 3rd time, on December 17th, did he say, enough is enough. And he came over to Atlanta and he met with Martin Luther King, and he said, you got to come and help us. We have to be more aggressive in our pursuit of nonviolence, because they're just picking on us, and nobody's doing anything. It's not even being reported. And so just before Christmas, we decided to go to Birmingham to challenge segregation without violence. And Martin was very almost blasé about it. He said, look, we're only being segregated because we're stupid enough to finance our own discrimination. He said, if we were not putting our money in these stores, they wouldn't be able to do business. And so we decided, and everybody talks about the dogs and the fire hoses, and that was true, but the significant thing was the non-cooperation with evil was as important as cooperation with good. So for 90 days, nobody bought anything but food or medicine. Well, when 300,000 people, black and mostly black, but whites also, stopped buying, the economy shut down. And then all of a sudden, the people who had been attacking us and accusing us and calling us names realized that we had to sit down, as Martin Luther King said, that either we were going to live together as brothers and sisters, or we would perish together as fools. And when we sat down with them and said, look, you know, we don't have anything against you. It's just that we don't believe in white water and colored water. If that's important to you, we can't shop here. Well, we can take those signs down. Well, take the signs down, and that's a good start. We don't believe in shopping where we can't work. And they said, well, we have a hard time finding people qualified. No. Go home and ask your wives. When they want something in a department store, they don't go to the little girls you bring in from Alabama and Auburn for 6 weeks at a time. They go to the maids who've been there for the last 10 years. In fact, you find that the women you're calling maids know more about your business than your managers do. Why don't you just put them in the dresses that they're selling, pay them a living wage and a commission, and watch your business grow? And so systematically, one at a time, breaking down the traditions, and surprisingly, when we stopped supporting those injustices and took our responsibility, and Dr. King used to say, you know, you can't blame white people. If you're going to bend over and, you know, let somebody ride your back, they're going to ride it. But once you stand up and straighten up your back, they'll fall on the ground and they'll have to stand toe-to-toe with you as brothers. So, and that's basically sort of what happened in the South. And once people got to the point where they started living and working together, it became increasingly easy. Now, I always say that in Georgia, there's a debate, and I don't know how it would come out, who really did more for the integration of Georgia, Martin Luther King or Herschel Walker. Until Herschel Walker and the likes of Herschel Walker, you know, started playing football, Georgia never saw number one and very seldom saw the top 10. And so probably football is at least ahead of the churches in terms of integration. And they have taken more leadership in sports, and the changes in Southern universities have been phenomenal. And they're not legislated, that almost every university, state university in the South, has in the last 5 or 10 years had a black student government president. Many of them have had young black women as homecoming queens. And so gradually things are changing. They're changing every way but politically. And sooner or later that political change is going to occur, and it could even be this November, you never can tell. Because what we are hearing in the political community is really the fears. And nobody has challenged us to take on the future and to be responsible for organizing a global economy and designing ways that people can live together harmoniously, and where we can have economic justice, at least freedom of economic opportunity. And we've been pretty lucky with that in Atlanta. And we've managed to make things happen that people thought were impossible. But we did it first by luck, because I went back to Atlanta from the United Nations, and I'd been on the banking committee, so I knew that there was money in the world. It just wasn't in the United States banks. And the petrodollars were in Holland, and they were in Germany, they were in Switzerland, they were in Japan, Canada. And so we went to those places and invited them to bring their money to Atlanta. And we assured them only that their money would be safe, that they didn't have to pay anybody under the table. It was an honest environment, and it was an efficient environment. We could almost guarantee that whatever projects they took on, we would work with them to see that their projects finished on time and within budget. And with that kind of guarantee and with that kind of invitation, the money just flooded in. And, you know, it didn't happen that way everywhere. In 1970, when I went to Congress, Detroit was 6 million and we were 1 million. Now, Detroit's 1 million and we're 6.5 million. It, by and large, is the switch from government-run policy to a public-private partnership, which we came to call public-purpose capitalism. And public-purpose capitalism essentially was defining a public purpose and then figuring out a way to finance it privately and manage and let the private sector build and manage and run it. Our airport's the best example of that. Since 1980, we've probably put $14 to $15 billion into that airport. But nobody cares, because last year it earned $38 billion, last 1 year. It will probably earn $50 billion, according to the present mayor, by the time he leaves in 2017. And we have 400,000 jobs revolved around that airport. And there will probably be at least 500,000 in another couple of years. So if we think rationally and think about how we shape the future and work on problems together, there's literally no problem that we can't solve. And I think that Rhode Island School of Design is the kind of place that they're going to make you think. And the teachers will not make you think, your classmates will make you think. People will raise questions that you don't know the answers to, and you have to think about it, and you have to read. And, you know, I used to have to get on the bus in Washington and go down to the Library of Congress and stand in line and find something in the stacks and wait to sign it out, and it would take me 3 hours to get a half hour with a book. Now all you got to do is Google the daggum thing. And it tells you almost as much as you need to know. And if it doesn't tell you all you need to know, it tells you very quickly where you can find it. And so with the technological advances, with the communications understanding you have, can you imagine us running sit-ins and civil rights movements with no cell phones? Nobody knew. Well, a computer, even when I got to be mayor, we had 4 floors of mainframe computers to deal with the city's business, and 1 floor didn't have as much memory and capacity as the little iPhone I got in my pocket. You know, I mean, we are ready to take on the future. We've just got to develop the faith and confidence that I think of as part of the Great Society of the 60s, the greatest generation coming out of the Second World War, the founding fathers of this part of the world. It certainly wasn't cut and dried and easy for them. But there's a resilience amongst the American people that comes by virtue of the fact that we are different. If we were all the same, we wouldn't have the same chemistry. We wouldn't have the same conflict. It's the conflict and chemistry that creates the need for growth and for change. And when we respond to that, we succeed. And so nowadays, I think a lot of kids are getting sort of restless. But I was very encouraged when a young man, a young rapper, Kendrick Lamar, came out with a rap about a whole lot of problems, but it ended up with this "all right." It's called "All Right." And I said, well, maybe these kids are not lost anyway, because in the 60s, it was the Impressions that wrote, "It's all right, have a good time, 'cause it's all right." And that was one of our theme songs through the movement. And then I remember my grandmama back talking about the old slave songs. And she had a song that said, "I got a feeling everything's gonna be all right. I've got a feeling everything's gonna be all right. Don't you know, I've got a feeling everything's gonna be all right. Be all right, be all right, be all right." God bless you.
Good evening. My name is Jared Hines, a graduate student from architecture representing the Graduate Student Alliance. Ambassador Young, I am standing here tonight as a representative of our student community. We are a student community that represents 59 countries, a wealth of artistic traditions, and an array of cultural backgrounds. We are honored that you have joined us as we remember the life, the legacy, and charge of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. At this moment, we would like to present you with this RISD citation as a token for appreciation for your steadfast commitment to global justice.
Hello, my name is Yulisa Jean Charles, and I'm the president of the Undergraduate Student Alliance. And the Rhode Island School of Design honors Andrew Young for his distinguished global achievements, compassion and integrity, and his visionary commitment to eradicating racism, war, and poverty.
Well, I think I've already put the monkey on your back. These are the people who I met before, who I said, you know, be prepared. You're going to have to run the world. God bless you.
Thank you.
All right, we have a few minutes now for, excuse me, hold on. We have a few minutes now for questions. I think we have people with mics out here in the audience. So if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. They will come to you, and we will go from there. So there's one up the top there, another one over there. Just wait a few minutes. We'll see how fast our runners can run.
They said 30 seconds. How about 10 seconds? What is your feeling on young people not taking the opportunity to vote and not appreciating the rights to take a bus and sit where they choose?
Well, I think that that's only partially true. I think young people voted very heavily for Barack Obama. And I think so far we have not given them anything to get excited about. Except that one of the reasons I didn't try to talk politics too much, but once they began to realize that the decisions that are being made this coming November are going to be responsible for the majority of their lives. The Supreme Court justices that'll be appointed, the federal judiciary, the shape of the Congress, the issues that are coming up, whether we move backwards or move forwards. I think all of that's going to sort of clarify itself pretty soon. And up to now, we haven't been talking issues, we've been talking personalities. And I think that once the issues began to take place and shape up, I think you're going to see young people very, very active. Because they know they are going to have to live in this future, so they better take some charge of it.
Ambassador, I'm 64 and remember the 60s and 70s very clearly. You know, God bless Rosa Parks, citizen activist, someone who said it's not right, and she took it upon herself to make a statement. So now in your comments, you mentioned, you know, we live in a culture where Wall Street buys and sells candidates. I was listening to Cornel West the other day in an interview, and he said the one authentic voice for the country today is Bernie. I'm just curious, how do you feel about that? I know the Clinton legacy is very strong.
Well, what I said, though, was that the way we answered, I mean, the bailout of Wall Street was something that probably somebody had to do. It could have been done differently, and I wish that people had listened to, well, let's just call names if we want to. Larry Summers and Rahm Emanuel didn't listen to Elizabeth Warren. If they had, it would have been a different approach to Wall Street. We find Wall Street, see, we borrowed $15 billion from Wall Street for the airport. And every year since I was mayor, it has earned more, I mean, double what we borrowed. So that's the way to use Wall Street. What I would do, and what I'm waiting for somebody to use it, to say, well, I even went to the White House to try to tell Bush that he could use Wall Street to get reelected. And I didn't want him reelected, but I come from Louisiana. And all my life I watched the Mississippi River flood. But it doesn't flood in New Orleans anymore. And the reason is that they built a convention center and a Hilton hotel and a casino, and in order to build it on the river's edge, they had to go down about 150 feet with concrete and steel, so that they created a barrier to the river, and New Orleans downtown doesn't flood. Now, I don't know why St. Louis and Cincinnati and, I mean, when I looked it up, $17 billion worth of damage had been done in the state of Illinois alone. And over 70,000 farmers had to be relocated temporarily. And that happened in 1993. It's happening again this year. It's going to happen more often than not. But I don't know why somebody doesn't say, well, what we did about our problems, we created enterprise zones. And when we built our mass transit system, we said anybody that builds, that we can create a public-private planning corporation that can decide how to plan within a half-mile radius of each mass transit stop. And that means you can get a government fund for the planning. It means once you put it together, you can get private funding once the feasibility studies are done. And we built Atlanta around our mass transit stops with Wall Street money on a one-line amendment that I put into the mass transit bill. This system works if you're interested in working it. There's nobody that has created more jobs, fed more hungry people than free enterprise system. Even in China, and you know, Russia's heyday came when communism declined. You know, now that we've broken the barrier with Cuba, watch Cuba take off. And there's nothing wrong with, I mean, it's not a matter of ideology, it's a matter of commitment and vision. Since I'm here, design. That you have to design the future. And it's not going to be written in a political speech by any candidate. Because the political speeches are written by people who do polling to tell people what they want to hear. And, you know, somebody breaks out of that and hits a real chord. And I mean, things can change very easily.
Was there someone up back? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Governor, for being here tonight. I wanted to ask a question where you can continue on addressing economic opportunities on a global level. How do we strengthen NAFTA in order to allow refugees to stay in their countries and actually work? What is it that our government can actually do? Utilizing maybe a boycott on a government level, like with Mexico, where they treat their workers in much better than they are now. How do we, as Americans, make sure that happens?
Well, I tell you, the young lady who presented me the award from Costa Rica, and I was in Costa Rica back in the 70s when I was at the UN. The president then, President Oderbeer, gave me a completely new view of the Western Hemisphere. He pulled down the map of the Caribbean, and he says, now, you have been programmed to see this as 50, 60 different little island nations. He said, that's not the way I see it. The way I see this is if you count Mexico and go around Colombia, Nicaragua, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, and come on up the Caribbean, I mean, Barbados and Jamaica to Cuba and Puerto Rico. He says, that is America's largest trading partner. There are more than 200 million people there. They're fairly well educated, and they are all inclined to think and be a part of the United States of America. He said, if if we viewed this Caribbean basin as a nation and didn't think of the water, he said America had to pay hundreds of billions of dollars to build expressways and waterways to connect their country from coast to coast. We have no cost. All we have to do is design ships that can meet our purposes, and we are already able to unite. It's a matter of vision, and I think that that's one of the things that the young lady's going to have to go back and design. As an architect, she's going to have to be an architect not just for Costa Rica, but Guatemala's a little hungry, and Nicaragua's going to be building a new canal that'll be wider than the Panama Canal. And the money is out there, the technology's out there, the need is out there. All we need is the vision, and I don't like the term political will, but we need the guts to go ahead and get something done. But anything we know how to do. Back in the 70s, when I was in Congress, there was a Japanese institution called the Global Infrastructure Fund. And they had 50 projects that cost about $10 billion each that would pay for themselves, that would make the planet more accessible. It would create jobs in just about every part of the world. One of the things was another Panama Canal. Another was a canal under the English Channel. But there were many other things, a bridge from Scandinavia to mainland Europe. And all of those things would pay for themselves. Atlanta's airport pays for itself. It did not cost the taxpayers one penny. And it creates 400,000 jobs. And we just made sure that everybody shared in it. 40% of every contract we spent on that airport was done by a minority or female-owned company. And so, you know, even the guys shining shoes in the airport, you know, were knocking out shoe shine before the war. When I was mayor, we didn't have all that security, and everybody got their shoes shined at the airport. And they could make $100,000 a year in 4 hours shining shoes, because they were making about $4 a shine, and people would always tip them $1, and they could do a shine in 90 seconds. That would be the time to shine the shoes, get them up, collect, and get them on. And they were running people in and out of there so fast, we had to actually slow them down and put more people on so that they weren't hurting themselves, because they would have stayed there and made money till they couldn't straighten up. But we limited people to 4 hours a stretch, and that gave a lot more people, and nobody could ever track them down to get income tax out of them. And so, but even the people cutting the grass and mowing the lawn and doing the landscaping were minority-owned companies of several families that came together. And that airport looks as good, and they know how to keep it green and how to have flowers blooming in the right season. And that was about $1.5 million a year contract just to keep the grass cut. So we worked at how to get poor people into the mainstream of the economy. When I say poor people, I doubt that any of them could have written a proposal or, you know, submitted a grant, but we help them. And their children are going to college, their grandchildren are going to college on that contract.
I'm learning, so I hate to cut things off, but we have time, still have time for a couple more questions, brief questions. There's a young woman here, and there's a gentleman there, please. Can we get a mic down front? Oh, we do? Oh, God. All right. Yeah, go.
Hi, Ambassador Young and Marco. So I wanted to, first I wanted to say I think the students at RISD are extremely privileged being able to know each other, and I think it's really obvious once you get here that everyone here is going to be extremely successful and, like you said, run the world one day. But also there, like that, you know, is obvious. But knowing for where I'm from, there's a lot of other students who like got left behind. Like I was part of a graduating class of over 500 to 600, and only 2 students left the state. Only 5 applied to go to Ivy League schools, and it was just like a very pessimistic class. And you can see it now on like social media how much people don't believe that their votes count. And then I know I'm always having to convince everyone, including my family, like you gotta vote, you gotta go do this, you gotta like care. How do you convince the pessimists? Like, especially the pessimists who like over and over again say really like this doesn't.
You don't convince them, you ignore them. And because they are irrelevant. And you give them too much attention, and basically that's what doubters want, is attention. And we don't have time for doubters, we want visionaries. If he want, well look at, he doesn't think politics, what do you want to do? And we had to do that with nonviolence. People would say, well, I can't be nonviolent, I don't believe. I said, how many people have you killed? I said, now, you talk about white people as so bad. When did you slap one last? And no, you can't be violent. You're a coward and you're chicken. You know, shut the hell up, do something, you know, get out of my face.
Who is the next question? Is it here?
Hi.
Got the mics.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm confused about the mics. I'm confused.
Ambassador Young.
You're going to end. How's that?
Ladies first.
You go first, please.
First of all, thank you for your presence and for your words of wisdom and perspective and for your example. You had made a comment earlier that events are orchestrated to come together so that we can change the world. And I was wondering what events you see coming together now in this age, not just here in America, but internationally, coming together to change the world.
Well, I tell you what, I read a paper by a Nigerian economist, and I had a lot of faith in Nigeria, and then I kind of gave up. But he was saying that Nigerians in the United States send back each year $21 billion in remittances. That Nigeria right now, with all of its corruption and everything bad you want to say about it is true. But it's still growing fast. It's growing 2.8%. South Africa is growing about 2.6%. The United States is lucky to grow 2%. So something good is happening even where all of the publicity is bad. And if I didn't get anything else over to you, it's that news nowadays, the slogan is, if it bleeds, it leads. And so I've been to 152 countries, and I've never been to a country yet where, and I didn't just go meet with the government officials. I usually find a way to hang out with some students, get off the beaten path, talk to the rebels or whatever. And I haven't found anybody yet that would not respond to creative American leadership. And if I can just have one more minute and say that Jimmy Carter did something that was revolutionary, and he did it with one word. When I became ambassador, he gave me a piece of paper about half this size with a note on it. I want you to go to Africa and ask African leaders what they expect of this administration. The operative word being ask. If you ask the North Koreans right now what is it they would like from America, it's just a little respect. See, I mean, it took us a long time to get around to making sense with Iran, but to say that Iran is what Khomeini says is like saying all the United States is what Donald Trump says. I mean, there are in all of these countries a kind of silent majority that's looking for an opportunity to become a part of the mainstream economy of the world, mainstream global economy. And I think as soon as we give them that chance, and with Carter, the African leaders didn't want as much from us as we wanted to give. They wanted us to help them. But because we were helping them, it didn't cost us any money. We didn't have to send any troops. And I've had an expression that I've been throwing around because everybody's talking about boots on the ground to solve problems. Boots on the ground don't solve problems. They just create more. And what I say is we got to put some Ferragamos on the ground. That by and large, businessmen and women who are able to create jobs, the only answer to bullets is jobs. And as soon as you create jobs almost anywhere in the world, I mean, ISIS was created when people took the money and ran and left people with guns and no jobs. We didn't do that after the Second World War. Germany and Japan were much stronger enemies than Iraq ever was. And if we had taken half of the money that fled the country and went to Dubai, if we had reinvested that into Iraq. In fact, we had a bunch of Iraqi Americans who spoke the language, whose parents were still there, and who came to me to try to, well, their plan was to create partnerships with Delta Airlines, with Home Depot, with Walmart, with Coca-Cola. And they wanted to move American industry back into Iraq and create jobs with Iraqis that they knew. But that required some money that had already been appropriated. But the money appropriated, which I think was about $6 billion a month over 9 years, was never accounted for. The company that got the money left Houston and declared they were no longer an American company, and they're now in Dubai. And nothing's been said about it. So jobs, let me just say this, the little book, The Coming Jobs War by Jim Clifton of Gallup polls. There are 1.2 billion jobs on the planet now. There's 6 billion people. That's not enough jobs. If we could get up to 3 billion people or 2.5 billion people, by the time we get to be 7 billion people on Earth, we will probably have peace. But the only pathway to peace is jobs. That's the reason I say you designers are going to have to create some designs that put people to work and that create peace on Earth and prosperity for all God's children, and God bless you, you don't have any choice. You got to do it. The only other option is destruction, and we usually find some way to survive. We go right to it's brinksmanship. We go right to the edge of the brink, and then we do what's right. Well, we're getting pretty close to the brink right now, so you all get ready to do what's right.
Okay, so we're a little bit over time, but I know there are two people waiting to ask questions. Can you promise me to be brief? Can you do that?
Yes.
Yeah? All right.
Definitely.
Good. So one down here. Why don't you go first, and then you can end. Does that sound great? Yeah? Cool? All right, go ahead.
First off, I'd just like to say that I'm honored to be able to address a person of your stature with such an extensive history of service to our country and really dedicating yourself to the betterment of our future and improving the lives of millions of people in America. So, thank you. And I want to thank RISD for making this opportunity available to the community to be able to interact with people like the Ambassador, Andrew Young. Thank you so much, RISD. I appreciate it. Well, my question is, what would you say to the members of the community who haven't had the chance to go to school and get a college education as pertains to having a positive change in their communities and possibly beyond?
Well, I'd say that people have been making it without a college education for a long, long time. In fact, most of the businesses that are successful started by people who were not college educated. I mean, Macy's started with a push cart. Automobile repairs, shade tree mechanics. There's no shortage of jobs. You have to find your way to work. I was not proud of it, but my son decided that he did not want to waste his time and my money. And he said, there isn't a college in this country that teaches you how to make money. And he said, you have to learn that on your own. And he's gone out on his own, and he's doing better than my 3 daughters who I spent over $1 million educating. Not that their education is wasted, but you know, by the time you got a law degree and an engineering degree and a couple of masters, I was glad I didn't have to pay for him. But if somebody's going to take care of me in my old age, he's going to be the one. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not putting education down. I'm simply saying that education is not the pathway to success. 50 Cent sold, what is that stuff? Vitamin water to Coca-Cola for $4 billion? And I don't think he finished high school. Now, Will Packer, who did, well, what's his name? Tyler Perry's not a college graduate. Will Packer did finish Florida A&M, but he made $200 million last year on Straight Outta Compton. And the lead line in that is, you're about to witness the value of street knowledge. And that's the final line also. And I think you ought to see that. Because you see that, well, the wealth generated in Atlanta is not, I hate to say this, but the Ivy League graduates are not generating the wealth. It's the dropouts, it's the historically black colleges, it's the veterans who come back. And there's something about an Ivy League education that gives you a sense of entitlement. And once you get out here, there ain't no entitlement. You got to hustle for everything you get. And so hustling in the books is one thing, but you also have to hustle and build relationships. And I particularly am critical of the black students who go to Ivy League schools and then sit at the table with only black students? That don't make sense. Sit with the money. It's not about black and white, it's about green.
Last question.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Hello, my name is Samia. I am 13 years old. As everyone else has said, it's a privilege to meet you, and at a very young age, it's a privilege to meet someone who has experienced meeting with and speaking with Martin Luther King Jr. My question is, what advice would you give to younger members of the world who want to continue the leadership and legacy and continue to develop a better world?
Well, you know, when people ask me where did I study to be an ambassador, my answer is always the same: Valina C. Jones School. In 3rd grade, I had to either get beat up, run, or negotiate. And I learned that the best way to keep from getting beat up, since I was the youngest and the smallest in the class, was to stop fights from happening. And by and large, that's all Martin Luther King did. He basically became a mediator between people who disagreed, and he helped them to find spiritual solutions to what they felt to be practical earthly problems. And I think just keep on doing what you're doing. What you're doing is working. You keep on, it'll take care of itself. The Bible says, be not anxious for the morrow. Let the day's own trouble be sufficient unto the day thereof. You take care today, the Lord will take care tomorrow.
Thank you, Ambassador Young. I think we're going to take a short break. Ambassador Young will then sign books only. There were books for sale out in the lobby. If you'd like to do so, please line up on the left side of the auditorium. I'm supposed to make closing remarks, but I don't have any other than, are things worse than they were before? Hell no. Be prepared to leave the world, lead the world rather, and we're going to be all right. Thank you, Ambassador Young. Thank you.